The Romulans outright refused Earth's generous trade proposal, a slap in the face of human diplomacy that could spell economic ruin for billions. Roy Coleman, humanity's silver-tongued ambassador, had delivered an impassioned speech to the Romulan Senate, detailing the mutual benefits of a landmark trade deal between Earth and Romulus. But Praetor Sirius, the stoic Romulan leader, dismissed it out of hand, declaring that Romulus would never rely on a lesser civilization like Earth. Sirius's words still rang in Roy's ears as he stormed out of the Senate chamber. The Romulans' arrogance was infuriating, but their refusal was catastrophic. Earth needed this deal. Without access to Romulan markets and resources, key human industries would collapse, plunging Earth into a depression that could last decades. Millions could lose their jobs, their homes, their livelihoods. Some could even starve. As Roy walked through the Senate's marbled halls, frustration and desperation warred within him. He had to change Sirius' mind, but how? The Praetor seemed unmovable, and his disdain for humanity ran deep. Roy was at a loss for... Suddenly, a deafening boom shook the building. The floor heaved beneath Roy's feet, throwing him to the ground. Sirens blared and screams echoed as smoke poured into the halls. Roy staggered upright, ears ringing, and saw Praetor Sirius pushing himself up from the rubble. A jagged piece of the ceiling crashed down toward the Romulan leader. Without hesitation, Roy lunged for Sirius, tackling him out of the way as the debris shattered on the floor. Sirius stared at Roy in shock, as if unable to process that a human had just saved his life. Around them, Romulan security forces rushed to secure the area and tend to the wounded. Roy heard them shouting about terrorist bombs and Romulan extremists. He realized these radicals had tried to kill Sirius for even considering talks with Earth. As the chaos subsided, Roy told Sirius that this heinous attack proved why Earth and Romulus needed to work together. The extremists were a threat to both their peoples. Cooperation was vital. But even after Roy's selfless act, Sirius was unmoved. The Praetor insisted Romulus would handle this internal matter alone. He would not be indebted to Earth. Leaving Romulus empty-handed, his mission a failure, Roy was still resolved to change Sirius's mind and stop the extremists before they struck again. The stakes were even higher now, and so was Roy's determination. He would find proof of the radicals' plans and expose the danger they posed to Romulus itself. He would demonstrate humanity's value as an ally. Even with the Praetor rejecting him, Roy knew he had to act. The fate of Earth and Romulus was on his shoulders. Two worlds that would rise or fall together, whether Sirius wanted it or not. Undaunted by the recent setbacks, Roy slips away from the Romulan Senate complex, his mind racing with plans. He has to stop these extremists before they tear apart any hope of peace. In a shadowed alley in the Romulan capital, Roy meets with Varys, his clandestine ally. The Romulan official's face is lined with worry. "The radicals grow bolder every day," Varys says, glancing over his shoulder. "I've uncovered their next target, the Darvan Energy Facility. They mean to cripple it." Roy's eyes narrow. Sabotage? Taking out Darvan would leave half the capital without power. It would be chaos. "Precisely their aim," Varys nods grimly. "Tarius, their leader, wants to stoke anti-human hysteria, make our people believe the alliance negotiations caused this." Roy clenches his fists. He can't let that happen. "I'll stop them." Varys clasps Roy's shoulder. "Be careful, my friend. I'll do what I can to buy you time, but Tarius is ruthless. Don't underestimate him." Roy infiltrates the Darvan facility disguised as a Romulan worker, slipping past security. Inside, his worst fears are confirmed. Explosives are rigged across the reactor core, set to blow the place sky high. Gritting his teeth, Roy starts disarming the detonators. Suddenly, an energy bolt sizzles past his head. Tarius and his fanatics have found him. "Step away from those charges, human," Tarius snarls, disruptor aimed at Roy's chest. "You won't stop us from saving Romulus from your taint." Roy doesn't flinch. "You're dooming your own people, Tarius. This alliance is vital for both our worlds. Can't you see that?" "Lies!" Tarius roars. "Humans only want to dominate us, control us. Romulus must stand alone. The extremists open fire, but Roy is already moving. Ducking and rolling, he draws his own disruptor and fires back. A fierce firefight erupts, energy beams crisscrossing the facility. Roy's combat training kicks in as he weaves between cover, outmaneuvering the radicals. One by one, Terrius's men fall until only the leader is left. Terrius lunges at Roy, a plasma blade flashing. Roy parries the slash, locking grips with the Romulan. They grapple back and forth, each trying to overpower the other. With a burst of strength, Roy wrenches the blade from Terrius's hand. The defeated radical staggers back. "It's over, Terrius," Roy says, leveling his disruptor. But Terrius has one last trick. He slams his fist on a hidden switch, and the remaining bombs start counting down. "For Romulus!" Terrius cries before fleeing. Roy curses and sprints to the charges. With seconds to spare, he frantically rips out the detonator cores, defusing the explosives. The facility is safe. But as alarms blare and Romulan security rushes in, Roy knows his mission is far from done. News of the thwarted Darvan attack spreads like wildfire. Some Romulans decry Sirius for not protecting them from this threat. Seizing the moment, Roy convinces Varys to arrange a covert meeting with sympathetic senators, a slim chance to turn the tide. But as Roy works to build pro-human support, Sirius takes notice. The Praetor won't sit idle. He sends his loyal agent Valak to shadow the human, determined to uncover Roy's game. The web of intrigue around Roy grows ever more tangled. And in the shadows, Terrius and his extremists plot their most daring move yet. An all-out strike on the Romulan Senate itself. An attack that could mean the end of the alliance, and maybe even Earth itself if Roy fails to stop it in time. The clock is ticking, and the fate of worlds hangs by a thread. Roy Coleman wiped sweat from his brow as he crouched behind a stack of crates in Terrius's weapons cache. His heart pounded as disruptor fire sizzled past, scorching the wall behind him. He'd infiltrated the facility on a tip from Varys, but the extremists had been waiting. "We've got the human pinned down!" a Romulan voice shouted. "Flank him!" Roy gritted his teeth. He was outnumbered 5-1, but he couldn't fail now. Earth and Romulus were counting on him. He pulled a stun grenade from his belt and hurled it over the crates. A blinding flash erupted, followed by cries of confusion. Seizing his chance, Roy vaulted over his cover and charged. His disruptor barked twice, dropping 2 stunned Romulans. A third swung at him with the butt of his weapon, but Roy ducked under it and swept the man's legs. As the Romulan fell, Roy brought his elbow down hard on the back of his head. The last 2 extremists recovered from the grenade and opened fire. Roy dove and rolled, coming up behind a computer terminal. He tapped furiously at the controls, bringing up the facility's security systems. With a few keystrokes, he activated the fire suppression protocols. Foam sprayed from the ceiling, blinding his attackers. Roy burst from cover and took them down with precision shots. Panting, he surveyed the unconscious Romulans. That's when he noticed a blinking data pad on one of their belts. Roy snatched it up, his eyes widening as he scrolled through its contents. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Hours later, Roy stood before Praetor Sirius in a secret meeting chamber beneath the Senate. The Romulan leader's face was a mask of stone as Roy laid out the evidence. "These logs detail weapons shipments authorized by members of your own administration," Roy said, sliding the data pad across the table. "Senator Vren, General Tival, even your chief of security. They're all working with Terrius." Sirius's eyebrows furrowed as he read, "Impossible. These are my most trusted advisors." "I'm sorry, Praetor, but the facts are clear. Terrius has infiltrated the highest levels of your government. If we don't act now, he'll assassinate you and the other moderate leaders." Sirius's eyes bored into Roy. "And why should I trust you, human? This could all be an elaborate deception." "Because if I wanted to deceive you, I wouldn't have saved your life in the Senate bombing," Roy countered. "Earth needs this alliance as much as Romulus does. We're stronger together than we ever could be apart." For a long moment, Sirius was silent. Then he nodded curtly. Very well. We will work together, for now. But if I detect even a hint of betrayal... You won't, Roy assured him. Now let's take down these traitors. Over the next week, Roy and Sirius's hand-picked strike team conducted lightning raids across the capital. They apprehended the implicated officials one by one, always staying one step ahead of Terrius's network. But with each interrogation, a chilling picture emerged. It's worse than we thought, Roy told Sirius as they pored over intelligence reports. Terrius isn't just planning a coup. He intends to use your planetary defense grid to launch an all-out assault on Earth. Sirius's face paled. That would mean war with the entire Federation. Romulus would be destroyed. Exactly. Terrius doesn't care about Romulan lives, only his twisted ideology. We have to stop him before... The door burst open. Valak, Sirius's aide, stormed in, flanked by guards. Praetor, I've uncovered proof of the humans' true intentions. Roy's blood ran cold as Valak produced a data crystal. What are you talking about? This contains transmissions between you and Starfleet intelligence, Valak sneered. You've been feeding them classified Romulan data this entire time. That's impossible, Roy protested, but the guards were already moving to restrain him. He looked to Sirius, whose face had hardened once more. Praetor, you know me. This has to be a setup by Tarius. But Sirius turned away. Take him to the detention center. We'll get to the bottom of this. As the guards dragged him out, Roy's mind raced. He had to find a way to prove his innocence and stop Tarius before it was too late. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and time was running out. The force field shimmered and vanished. Roy stepped out of the detention cell, his legs unsteady after days of confinement. Varys stood nearby, a data pad in her hand. The evidence exonerates you completely, she said, but we're not out of danger yet. Roy nodded, his mind already racing ahead to their next move. He followed Varys through the winding corridors of the Romulan security complex until they reached a heavily guarded chamber. Inside, Praetor Sirius paced back and forth, his face a mask of tension. So the human is innocent, Sirius said, his voice dripping with lingering suspicion. Or perhaps this was all an elaborate ruse to gain my trust. With all due respect, Praetor, Roy replied, we don't have time for suspicion. Tarius is closing in on the planetary defense systems as we speak. Sirius's eyes narrowed. And how do you propose we stop him? Roy laid out his plan, detailing a daring infiltration of Tarius's command center. As he spoke, he could see the reluctance in Sirius's eyes slowly give way to grim acceptance. It's risky, Sirius admitted. But you're right. We have no choice. Within hours, Roy found himself crouched behind a rocky outcropping near Tarius's fortress, Varys at his side. A strike team of Romulan operatives waited nearby, their disruptors primed. Remember, Roy whispered, our job is to reach the control room and sever the uplink. Sirius and his forces will draw their fire. Varys nodded, her eyes steely with tenacity. The night air erupted with weapons fire as Sirius launched his frontal assault. Roy and his team sprinted for a side entrance, using the chaos as cover. They fought their way through twisting corridors, disruptor bolts sizzling past their heads. Roy's heart pounded as they reached the central control room. The doors hissed open, revealing Tarius himself, flanked by guards. I should have known you'd be behind this, human, Tarius snarled. It's over, Tarius, Roy said, his disruptor trained on the Romulan extremist. Step away from the controls. Tarius laughed, a cold, cruel sound. You think this is about your pitiful planet? I will restore the Romulan Empire to its rightful place, subjugating all who stand in our way. He lunged for the control panel, but Roy was faster. A well-placed shot severed the main uplink cable, sending sparks flying. With a roar of rage, Tarius charged at Roy. They collided in a flurry of punches and kicks, grappling furiously. Roy could feel the raw hatred emanating from his opponent. Outside, the battle raged. Sirius and his loyal troops found themselves pinned down by the command center's formidable defenses. Just when all seemed lost, the fortress shuddered. Alarms blared as the reactors began to overload. Back in the control room, Roy finally gained the upper hand. With a decisive strike, he sent Terrius crumpling to the floor, gravely wounded. "You fool!" Terrius gasped. "Peace is a lie. There will always be conflict." Roy turned away from the dying extremist. The entire complex was starting to shake itself apart. He sprinted through collapsing corridors, linking up with Sirius and the survivors as they fled the doomed fortress. They materialized on a nearby hillside just as a massive explosion tore through Terrius's command center. Roy watched the fireball rise into the night sky, his mind already turning to the challenges that lay ahead. Days later, Roy stood before Sirius in the grand hall of the Romulan Senate. "You have proven yourself a true ally," Sirius said, his voice carrying a newfound respect. "We would be honored if you would return to Romulus to help solidify our partnership." Roy accepted with a nod, knowing that their victory was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, he believed Earth and Romulus could forge a lasting peace. Roy Coleman stood at the viewport of the Romulan cruiser, watching the sprawling cityscape of the capital grow larger as they descended. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him as he contemplated the fragile alliance he'd fought so hard to forge. Beside him, Praetor Sirius cleared his throat. "We've made progress, human, but many still view your presence here as problematic." Roy nodded, his heart made. "I understand, Praetor. We knew this wouldn't be easy." The Senate chamber buzzed with tension as Roy took his place beside Sirius. Angry murmurs rippled through the gathered Romulans. Senator Vrax, a vocal opponent of the alliance, rose to his feet. "Praetor Sirius, how can we trust the words of this human when Terrius nearly destroyed us all?" Vrax's voice dripped with venom. "His very presence here is an insult to those who died." Shouts of agreement echoed through the chamber. Roy clenched his fists, willing himself to remain calm as the vitriol washed over him. Sirius raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "I propose a solution. Let the human prove his worth through our most sacred rite, the trial of honor." A hush fell over the Senate. Roy's heart raced as he processed the implications. He knew refusing would doom the alliance, but accepting meant facing unknown dangers. "I accept," Roy said, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. The ancient Colosseum of Khitomer loomed before Roy, its stone walls etched with the scars of countless battles. He stepped into the arena, the roar of the crowd washing over him. Across the sand stood his first opponent, a towering Romulan wielding a wickedly curved blade. Roy ducked and weaved, relying on speed and agility to avoid the Romulan's powerful strikes. His muscles burned as he pushed himself to the limit, searching for an opening. Finally, he saw his chance. Roy feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping the Romulan's legs out from under him. The crowd roared as Roy claimed victory. But it was only the beginning. Test after grueling test pushed Roy to his physical and mental limits. He solved intricate puzzles while dodging energy blasts, navigated treacherous obstacle courses, and faced off against multiple opponents at once. Bloodied and exhausted, Roy faced his final challenge, Kovrak, Sirius's champion. The Romulan was a mountain of muscle, his eyes cold and merciless. They clashed in a brutal dance of fists and feet, neither giving ground. Kovrak's fist connected with Roy's ribs, sending waves of agony through his body. Roy stumbled, gasping for breath. The Romulan pressed his advantage, raining down blows. Roy's vision blurred, his legs threatening to give out. But deep within, Roy found a wellspring of strength. He thought of Earth, of the countless lives depending on this alliance. With a primal roar, Roy surged forward. He ducked under Kovrak's guard, landing a devastating uppercut that sent the Romulan crashing to the ground. The arena fell silent as Roy stood over his fallen opponent. Instead of delivering the final blow, Roy extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Kovrak clasped it, allowing Roy to help him to his feet. As the crowd's cheers washed over him, Roy swayed on his feet. The world spun, and he collapsed to the arena floor. Through the haze of pain, he saw Varys rush to his side, her face a mask of concern.
"Roy, listen to me," she whispered urgently. "The trial was rigged. Terrius's people, they're still out there, pulling strings. We have to tell Sirius."
Roy struggled to process her words as unconsciousness claimed him. When he awoke, he found himself in a medical bay, his body a mass of bruises and bandages. Sirius stood at his bedside, his face grave. "You've more than proven yourself human," Sirius said, "but Varys has uncovered evidence of a conspiracy. I must make a choice that will shape the future of Romulus." Days later, Roy stood before the Senate once more. Sirius addressed the chamber, his voice heavy with emotion. "In light of recent events, I hereby step down as praetor," Sirius announced. Gasps and shouts of disbelief echoed through the chamber. "I nominate Varys as my successor to lead Romulus into a new era of cooperation with Earth." As the dust settled, Roy worked tirelessly with the newly appointed praetor Varys to finalize the trade agreement. But even as they celebrated this milestone, Roy couldn't shake the bittersweet taste of victory. In a quiet moment before his departure, Roy sought out Sirius. The former praetor stood alone, gazing out over the city he'd once ruled. "I underestimated your people, Roy Coleman," Sirius said softly. "Perhaps there is wisdom in unity after all." Roy nodded, words failing him. As he boarded the ship that would take him back to Earth, he knew that while one chapter had closed, the true test of the Alliance was only beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.